In this video, I'm going to be showing you some basic tools that artists use when they're using graphite pencils. So here I have a set of graphite pencils that range from 9H to 9B. So I very rarely use any of these higher number H pencils in my classes. In fact, I think that the highest H number that I have in my own classroom is a 2H. So this shows you this is an 8H. The H stands for hard. The graphite is harder, and it when you're shading, it makes lighter marks. The other thing about the higher number H's is that when you do color with them or shade with them, you have to be careful because the graphite is so hard that you might indent your paper a little bit. So then when you go in to shade on top of it, sometimes, let's say you made a line and then you erased it, but then you go in later to shade. Sometimes you find you can't shade in that line because there's an actual groove in the paper. So I usually stay away from the higher H's in my classroom. So 2H is pretty much the lightest thing that you'll find. And then going up to HB, 2B, 4B, 6B. So we go all the way up to 9B. The B, you can think of it as standing for black. It's the darkest values. So the higher the B, the darker the value. The higher the H, the lighter the value. And then right in between, you have the HB. So that's talking about the variety of pencils that we have that you'll see. We also have a variety of erasers. It's pretty standard. We have the pink pearl eraser. This does a good job for most of what you want to do. The only thing is the more you use it, you kind of lose those hard edges, and then it's hard to erase details. It's also harder to erase some of the really, really dark marks. We have some white erasers that do a better job with that. Kneaded erasers are nice because you can make a point or shape it into whatever it is that you want it to be. Kneaded erasers also, you can control them a little bit better with the pressure in which you use them on the paper, so that let's say you want to erase a little bit, but you don't want to completely erase it to see the white paper underneath. You can control that a little bit better with the white or the kneaded erasers. So we have those two. And then another marking tool that we have Prismacolor ebony pencils, and it just gets you, it's a little bit of a different feel when you're shading. You can get some really darker darks with these two. So try those out and see how you like them. All right, there are different ways that you can blend when you're using graphite pencils. So I'm gonna do a value scale, and as I'm doing it, I'm gonna show you how I blend as I'm going across. So I'm gonna start with the HB pencil, and I'm gonna start on the left side over here. So let's think about the different things that you should be thinking about when you're shading. So one, pressure. The pressure that you're putting on the pencil to paper, the harder the pressure is, the darker the value is. So I can get a pretty dark value out of this H pencil, but I can also get lighter values just based on the pressure. So I'm starting with a light pressure, and I'm blending by layering. So layering is another thing that you can think about when you're shading. If you're getting lines and you want it to be smooth, another thing you can do is have a scrap piece of paper nearby, so that when you press really hard on your scrap piece of paper, you get kind of an angle to your pencil, like a flat edge. And then you can use that when you're shading. If you're using the point, so if I turn it over where that sharp point is that I made, it's harder to get a tonal value with no lines in it. So I've got more lines in this one. Another thing that you can use is a blending stump. Our classroom has a variety of blending stumps with different sizes, so you can use those. Let me grab one that doesn't have as much charcoal on the end of it. And I'm just coloring in circular motions to sort of blend that graphite in. The nice thing about blending stumps is too, once you get a little bit of residual graphite on the end of it, you can use that for even lighter layers. So I'm going to extend this value scale off to the left a little bit. And I've got kind of a line in between there. So I'm going to lightly go in where that is, because I want it to be a seamless value scale. I want to try to make it a seamless gradation with no lines dividing the values. All right, so as I'm moving to the right, I'm going to add a little bit of pressure using the same pencil. And I'm going back over what I've already shaded so that they overlap. That helps me keep that gradation smoother. At this point, I'm going to switch to a 2B pencil. I'm going to get a flat edge. I'm going to start over here and overlap a little bit. So I'm going to continue to layer. The more I layer, the darker the value gets. And as I'm moving to the right, I'm going to press a little bit harder. I'm going to go back over it with my blending stump. And then I can switch to my 4B. So I'm going to speed the video up a little bit here so that it doesn't take a long time. And while the video is going quicker, you'll see me pick up and put down pencils. So once I finish with this 4B, I'm going to use a 6B, and then I'm going to finish off with the 9B. At this point, I'm at my 9B. I'm using my 9B pencil and I'm pressing almost as hard as I can without breaking the pencil. Once you're adding this much pressure, this is called burnishing. At this point, it starts to almost get a little bit shiny when you look at it from different angles. And some artists don't like that, so it's just something to be aware of. So I've got a value scale that's moving from light values to darker values, and I probably could extend this a lot further to the left. We could get a lot more lighter values this way if we wanted to, and in fact I may do that a little bit with my blending stump. And let me see if I can show you a little bit about how you can pull up some value with the kneaded eraser. So if I've moved this value scale over a little bit using this blending stump, let's work on pulling some of that value up with the kneaded eraser. So I'm going to tap it on my lighter values just to get them a little bit lighter. I can go back in and blend them back together with my finger. I can use the blending stump again. So a lot of blending and shading is push and pull, trial and error. Push and pull, what I mean by that is adding and subtracting. Adding is when you add value to your paper using a pencil or whatever medium you're using. Subtractive is when you're taking it away. You're pulling some of the value back with an eraser. So that's a value scale. We did that with the pencils. Now I would encourage you to experiment with the tools in different ways. So I want to show you a couple of other things I have really quickly. This is called an eraser shield. So let me show you what it's used for. If I want to, let's say I want to just get a value down real quick. Let's say you have a tonal value down and you want to erase something really precisely. So let me get a little bit more value down. And this is another thing I'm doing. I'm changing the grip of my pencil. I'm holding it more sideways so I can get the edge of the pencil, the broad edge of the pencil down. This gives me more of a tonal value. And you don't always have to smooth everything out, but smoothing it out a little bit. Now let me show you how this eraser shield works. You can use this to get clean edges. So let's say I want a really clean straight edge against something. I can erase like that, and then I can pull out what's behind it on this side. So I can get a nice clean line. Also, if you watch me, I'm moving the little eraser crumblies off the paper. You can do that by blowing. Some artists have makeup brushes where they'll use that to kind of brush it away so that they don't smear what it is that they've been working on when they do that. When I first did it, I went this way, which really just messed up my nice clean line. So that's another thing to be aware of when you're working. So that's the eraser shield, and there's all different kinds of things you can do with this. There's little circles on here too as well. And another thing that we have in our classroom are these little mechanical erasers. You can use these, like especially for hair. If I was trying to draw in some highlights, you can use this as a subtractive drawing tool. So the eraser's in here. And we have refills if you need to refill it. You can use this with the eraser shield also. So that's another tool that we have. So at this point, after you've done all this, I would really just like you to experiment with some mark making. I want to remind you some of the things that we did in Art 1. We learned some different ways to build value. We learned about hatching. So hatching is when you use lines that are close together to build value. If you want a lighter value, you can separate those lines. You can also use a lighter pencil. And then to make darker values, you press harder, put your lines closer together. There's cross hatching. You can layer your lines going in different directions. The more layers you do and the closer your lines are together, the darker your values are. You can make up your own different ways for building value. Like you can do scribbling, and then think about what kind of objects this texture would work for. Maybe it will work well for trees. And then to build value there, same thing, press harder, use darker pencils, and more layering can give you darker values. So down here I can make the value a little bit darker. We talked about stippling. I tend to see stippling more in media like pen, because you can't blend tonally with a pen the way you can with a pencil, and so you might use stippling instead. But I want you to play around and do some just different mark making, just see what happens. You can keep it abstract, you don't have to try to draw anything yet. We're gonna do some of that later. But just play around with the graphite, see what kinds of marks you can make with different pencils, and have fun with it.